Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we are talking about Mr. Bob Hope. Get ready for a lot of Bob Hope zany quotes. You know he had some real zingers. And his autobiography was my main source, so I have a lot of them. It's a really, really good book, highly entertaining, as you would expect from Bob Hope's words. I definitely recommend it. He had a couple. This one was written in 1963, so he had a lot more life left in him after he wrote it. So although I usually get right into our story, before I dive in today, I want to announce that I'll be sharing a listener review periodically going forward. So if you want to hear your review of the show out of my voice, please make sure to take a minute and leave a review where you listen to your podcasts, and I just may share yours on the show. Speaking of my voice, it is kind of what prompted me to do this. Because after 10 and a half months and 45 regular episodes plus a handful of bonus episodes, I received my first ever negative review. And it was partly about my voice. I'm not going to lie, it kind of stung for a little bit. But then I remembered all of the wonderful reviews I've received over the life of this podcast, and it made my heart really happy. 45 episodes of nothing but positivity is actually a pretty good run. So thank you so much to those of you who have already taken the time to share your love, and even if you have something not so loving to say, I promise to take your comment to heart in a good way and use it to improve the show as much as I can. Unfortunately, this first negative review didn't really offer any constructive criticism, just a personal attack on my voice and the way I tell my stories. I can't change my voice, and I completely understand that it may not be something everyone wants to hear. I mean, I don't even like my voice. I also know that not every podcast is a good fit for every person. Trust me, I really know this because I personally am very particular about the podcasts I listen to. I've learned a lot during this journey, and I'm really excited to grow and improve the show as I continue on. Every day is a learning process. One thing I was told by a couple of fellow podcaster friends after this first negative review was this. Negative reviews are actually a good milestone because it means you have made it. So here I am, I'm making it. It's a ton of work, but I'm excited to reap the emotional rewards of that hard work, one review at a time. But I do want to remind everyone that beyond your keyboard, the person you are criticizing is a real person with real feelings. So please, please be kind. That goes for anyone you are reviewing online. You can disagree with that person or offer up opinions and ideas, but please be kind. There are a lot of amazing content creators out there putting their heart and soul into their work. Their free work, I might add. So just think about that before you choose your keystrokes and press send. So to kick this little segment off, I want to share a review from my number one supporter, well, besides my mom. It is Ellen from New York, and she is sweet enough to leave a comment or review on every single episode I publish. Ellen, this is seriously the highlight of my week every week. So thank you so much for giving me the positive feedback that fuels my passion for this work. I'm going to share Ellen's review of my Louis Armstrong episode that she shared on Spotify. She wrote, "I wept through much of this episode in the best possible way. Thank you for your loving coverage of this glorious gent and for acknowledging the horrors of racism. It's so important. Armstrong transcended so much and left the world an infinitely better place." Isn't Ellen just the sweetest person? Every single one of her comments is this wonderful. So although I don't expect everyone to feel as much happiness over my stories as Ellen does, it really does make this job so much more rewarding and gives me the fuel to keep putting my all into the work. I will be able to accept the bad, but comments like, "I'm sorry, but your voice and manner of reading your content is not conversational or enjoyable," really don't offer me up any ways to improve. I talk how I talk, and I'm really proud of the content I share because I put 1,000,000 hours into writing my scripts every single week. 1,000,000 hours I could be doing other things than creating free content for the world to enjoy. Anyways, thank you to Ellen, and thank you to everyone else who's ever left a comment or review. I'll be dipping into more of them, past and future ones, as we go along. So if you want to hear my unenjoyable voice read your review on the show, drop a review or comment where you listen. Now, as I like to get right into the story, I apologize for that rant. New listeners, I promise I usually dive right into what you're here to listen to. So, on to the great Bob Hope. Bob Hope was a born showman. By 3 or 4, he was singing or dancing or doing tricks any chance he could. He would put on a show for whoever happened to be in the room with him. By 12, he was performing on the streets of Cleveland for change. He had proper jobs too, but he would do this just because he loved to entertain people. And he loved spare change. In 1915, he entered a competition where he impersonated one of his favorite performers, Charlie Chaplin, and he won. Bob Hope was destined for show business. Leslie Towns Hope, who we know as Bob Hope, was born on May 29, 1903 in London. His parents were William and Avis Hope. William was a stonemason, and Avis had been a singer before settling down to raise her family. Why did she have to put all of her focus on her home and family? Well, because she had 7 children. 7 boys. Yikes. In true Bob Hope style, he said later, "I grew up with 6 brothers. That's how I learned how to dance, waiting for the bathroom." Leslie Towns Hope didn't become Bob Hope until he was a young adult, but I'm going to refer to him as Bob throughout the story just to make it a little easier on all of us. The family of 9 arrived in the United States through Ellis Island on March 30th, 1908, when Bob Hope was 2 months shy of his 5th birthday. And they made Cleveland, Ohio their home. Life was somewhat difficult financially, but the family was happy. To make ends meet, Bob and his brothers went out to earn a paycheck pretty early in life. Some of the jobs Bob had were selling newspapers on the street corner, selling flowers at a stand at an amusement park, drugstore delivery boy, plucking and gutting chickens at a meat market, shoe salesman, soda jerk, and pulling taffy at a candy store. So he had quite a diverse set of skills. Most of the jobs ended because of things like the toilet paper fight that got him fired from the drugstore. He was just always clowning around. Avis earned some extra money for the family by taking in boarders in their home. Homes, I should say. They relocated a lot within their neighborhood of Cleveland. Bob adored his mother and had nothing but respect for her. He knew what a challenging job she had, putting up with him and the 6 other Hope boys, 7 if you count her husband. Bob talked about her and his childhood in his book with so much fondness. "Mothers are wonderful people," he said. "Everyone ought to have a spare." I really enjoyed reading about their Saturday night routine. Saturday was a big night in the Hope house. It was bath night. Avis would put a big wash tub in the kitchen, and the order of the baths were determined by their conduct during the week. 1 tub of water, 7 kids to bathe in it, 1 by 1. That's why I was tan until I was 13, he said. Bob's father, William, had 3 hobbies. He raised chickens for fighting, which I hate. He was also a master gardener with a great love of flowers, and he was an alcoholic. William was funny, happy, and very well read. Aside from the cockfighting and maybe a little too much whiskey at times, he sounded like a really wonderful man. Little Bob did not sit still too often. As a preschool teacher, I can picture exactly what kind of child Bob Hope was. Because I've had many a Bob Hope-style children throughout the years. In fact, I have one little guy in my class right now that is destined for Bob Hopeness. I love this kind of spirit in a child. Anyways, Bob didn't even let his little legs or curious mind rest while he slept. He was a sleepwalker. One night, he made it out of the house in a much too short nightshirt and tried to get into the neighborhood drugstore. So his mother's remedy for this was to tie a rope between Bob's leg and his poor brother's leg. That poor woman. Just imagine finally letting your head hit the pillow after wrangling 7 boys all day, and then you have to deal with the wildest one of all strolling off in an unconscious daze. No wonder she wanted to tie them together. Girl was tired. School wasn't really Bob Hope's cup of tea. That's not surprising at all. He had been sent off to reform school when he was 15 for some kind of offense. It sounded like it was shoplifting or something like that. He was there for about a year and a half, and when he left the reform school, it marked the official end of his formal education. He would not return to finish high school. He would, however, receive 58 honorary doctorates by the time his life was over. 58. When Bob Hope was 16 years old, he decided to be a boxer. He was 128 pounds and went by the name Packy East. He actually did pretty good in his brief career as a boxer. He had 3 wins and 1 loss. At 18, Bob got a job working in the service department at a local car dealership. The job was just another job in the line of a dozen or so jobs he'd already had, but it was at this job where he and 3 coworkers organized a little barbershop quartet. Aside from the quartet, Bob decided to expand a little further into the world of show business. He obviously was not made for a typical job. He needed a place to shine and put his crazy antics to use. So he took dance lessons and hit the vaudeville circuit. Joining him much of the time was his girlfriend, Mildred. They would make $8 in their dance comedy routines together and split it down the middle. Being on the stage and receiving an enthusiastic audience response was a huge high for Bob Hope. He knew this was it for him. No other future existed for him. He was ready to spread his wings, take Mildred by her wings, and fly out into the world together. A world of making audiences laugh. But Mildred's parents had other plans for their daughter, so Bob Hope flew away from Cleveland alone. Bob and his new partner, Lloyd, created an act and joined the Jolly Follies, a traveling tab show. Tab shows were shortened, less spectacular versions of famous Broadway productions. They toured by bus through Ohio and down as far south as South Carolina. It wasn't a glamorous life in show business, far from, but Bob Hope was really happy. He made $40 per week and sent 20 of it home to his mother. He loved his mother. Bob fell in love with a new gal while on tour with the Jolly Follies. Fellow Jolly Folly, Kathleen O'Shea. I never gave a woman a second thought in those days, Bob recalled. My first one covered everything. And his first thought of Catherine O'Shea was hot. But although that was all going great, things were not going so great for Bob's partner Lloyd. He became violently ill from a piece of coconut cream pie on the road. So he was transported back home to Cleveland, and he died. Never trust pie. Team cake all the way. Bob's next partner was George Byrne, and they'd moved on from the Jolly Follies to the Smiling Eyes Vaudeville Company. Man, I just love these troupe names. Kathleen was still in the picture, but she had moved home to open a dress shop. So naturally, the relationship did eventually fizzle out. After 2 seasons with the Smiling Eyes, Bob and George branched off on their own and moved to Detroit, determined to make it big with their vaudeville acts. After perfecting their act a little more there, the next stop was the Big Apple. Things went pretty well at first, but then the looming excitement of talking films and radio overshadowed the old boring vaudeville theater acts. The year was 1927, the year when moving pictures were beginning their grand transformation into dialogue. Little by little, the vaudeville theater seats emptied. Once again, Bob Hope spread his wings and flew off alone. This time he didn't relocate, he stayed in New York. He just wanted to try his unique wit alone. So he broke up with his partner, George. This stemmed from a dumpy little theater that he and George had performed in, and with them being the last act, the manager asked them to announce to the audience who would be hitting the stage the next night. Bob Hope did this for them, adding his one-of-a-kind Bob Hope quick-witted flair to it. The audience response was great to his ad-lib jokes, and the theater manager said that he should hang up his top hat and cane and be a master of ceremonies. He had the perfect personality for it. Well, you can't just jump in and be an MC, of course. So he set out to perfect his solo act. A little singing, a little dancing, and a lot of witty talk. And, unfortunately, a smidge of blackface. Bob Hope is said to be the inventor of stand-up comedy. He traveled all over the country with his act, and he learned really quickly that the key to a well-received show was to create a connection with his audience right off the bat. Make it so he wasn't a showman entertaining an audience. It was a large group of friends together in one room with the funniest of them at center stage. Bob Hope soon had every single one of his audiences in the palm of his hand. The next step in Hope's career came in 1929 with the offering of a 3-year contract with the esteemed William Morris Agency for a whopping $450 per week. That is $8,400 per week today. He had set out to make it, and it seemed to be working. It wasn't happening overnight, but some of the best things come from a long, slow build with a lot of hard work behind it. And 26-year-old Bob Hope was putting in the work. Bob wasn't always working entirely alone either. He'd teamed up with a few other entertainers here and there, but it was in the stunning Louise Troxell that he found a partner he wanted to stick with, both on stage and off. The duo took a little break from their nonstop touring schedule to tie the knot in January of 1933. And then another break 22 months later to end that marriage. It wasn't meant to be. But the woman he met next just happened to be the one. Bob Hope had met Dolores Defina while doing a Broadway play. Bob had jumped onto the stages of Broadway and did 5 shows in 5 years during all of this other stuff he was doing. Dolores was a singer. It sounds like Bob was stuck in the friend zone with Dolores for longer than he would have liked, but she eventually warmed up to him romantically, and the two said "I do" shortly after his divorce from Louise. Bob and Dolores were it for each other. They remained married for the rest of their lives. "Dolores is much too good for me," Bob said of his wife. "She was raised on the right side of the tracks. We Hopes lived under the tracks." Bob and Dolores were married for 69 years, one of the longest show business marriages in history. Exciting new things were also happening in Bob Hope's career around the time he married Dolores. Radio. Hope entered the realm of radio in 1934. And 3 years later, he was signed under contract with NBC to appear in their regular series, The Woodbury Soap Hour. A year later, he was placed in The Pepsodent Show and signed to 10 more years with NBC, with a $2,500 per week paycheck, $58,000 per week today. He enlisted the help of a few ghostwriters during this time with The Pepsodent Show because he just had to be coming up with constant new material. One of them being Sherwood Schwartz, who later went on to create a couple little television shows you may have heard of, Gilligan's Island and The Brady Bunch. Bob Hope was finally famous. He was the most popular personality on radio, and in 1938, Hollywood came calling. His film debut was in The Big Broadcast of 1938 with W.C. Fields and Dorothy Lamour. It was a smash hit at the box office, and it was the picture that debuted what would become his signature song, Thanks for the Memories. 2 years after his big screen debut, Bob Hope starred in the first of 7 installments of the infamous Road movie series, the first being Road to Singapore in 1940. There would be 7 total throughout the decade, and it united him with one of his most beloved co-collaborators, Bing Crosby. These two had initially met and worked a bit together on the vaudeville circuit, and they had great chemistry and were a hit wherever they showed up together. Bing Crosby described his good friend Bob Hope like this, quote, "People are always asking me how Hope survives the schedule he sets for himself. The truth is, he couldn't survive without it. Applause, laughter, and commendation are food and drink for him. There's no tension felt when he walks on the stage, not by him anyhow. He expands, he mellows, he blooms, he beams. When he tells his first gag and the place falls apart, his life is complete. How can a fellow like that weaken physically? I once talked him into a vacation and he never forgave me. He had hives, shingles, and a spastic colon when he returned. Never again, he vowed," end quote. Bob Hope responded to this quote of Bing's by saying, "He's the luckiest man I know. Anything he touches turns to gold. Everything I touch yells for the police." Bob and Dolores were able to live quite the luxurious life in their San Fernando Valley home. Bob was careful, though, to live a good life, but not too good. He didn't need over-extravagance. Life was grand, but Dolores was home alone more often than with a husband by her side due to his wild touring schedule, so she desperately wanted a child to fill their home with love. The couple was unfortunately unable to have a baby, so they decided to adopt. In the fall of 1939, they adopted a baby girl and named her Linda. The following year, they added little Tony to their family. And in 1946, they completed their family with the adoption of 2 more children, a little boy named Kelly and a little girl named Nora. Their home was full of love and happy energy. The gap between Tony's adoption in 1940 and Kelly and Nora's in 1946 was due to World War II. And anyone who knows anything about Bob Hope knows of his heavy involvement in the USO during the war years. This, I think it's safe to say, was his legacy. His gig of entertaining troops began immediately after the U.S. entered the war in December of 1941. He first performed for the men stationed at the naval base in San Diego. Hope's mission was to ease some of the tension, fear, and uncertainty felt by the troops as they set out for the unknown. From San Diego, Bob Hope toured almost constantly throughout the rest of the war, visiting U.S. troops all over the world as they fought for our country. That thing I said about his early days, how he created a rapport with his audiences to create a more intimate and personalized experience for them, well, he took this and brought it to a whole new level with his USO tours. He knew what these men were sacrificing for their country, and he knew many of them would never again return home. He was going to give these men the absolute best of him. He carefully curated each performance to include material that applied to that specific branch of military or any other personalized spin he could create. Many, many celebrities traveled with him to round off his acts. He had a very strict rule for every personality that ever traveled with his USO tour, though. They were not allowed to shed one tear while visiting troops in military hospitals. Their duty was to keep morale high and keep the mood as positive as possible. Bob Hope broke his own rule on only one occasion during World War II. And then he was able to present the man who had brought him to tears with the Purple Heart before he died. He was absolutely amazed at the heroism he witnessed during his USO tours. When recounting how marvelous the servicemen he met in military hospitals were, he said, "They thank you for being there, but there will never be enough that you can do to thank them." Bob Hope also traveled with the Hollywood Victory Caravan in the spring of 1942, which was an all-star show that traveled across the U.S. with the goal of raising funds for the Army and Navy relief funds. Other stars in the caravan were Laurel and Hardy, Cary Grant, James Cagney, Claudette Colbert, Groucho Marx, Bing Crosby, Olivia de Havilland, Joan Blondell, Desi Arnaz, and the list goes on. While most of these stars were exhausted halfway through the coast-to-coast tour, the wildly energetic former vaudevillian Bob Hope not only put his all on the tour's stages, but popped into local radio stations along the route to offer up special wartime broadcasts. He was extremely passionate about his wartime contributions. When he wasn't performing for troops, he was still raising money for the war effort, most notably through one of his favorite pastimes, golf. He helped organize celebrity golf tournaments to raise funds for the war, combining fun with a good cause. That impression that vaudeville theater manager from Bob Hope's early days had, the one about him having the perfect personality to be master of ceremonies, well, it turned out to be spot on. Hope hosted the Academy Award ceremony for the first time in 1942. And he went on to host the ceremony 18 more times over the years. He was a very beloved MC at the Oscars. Just as 1940 had kicked off that decade with the transition into the medium of movies for Bob Hope, 1950 kicked off yet another new adventure for him for the next new decade: television. And boy, was it going to be a big thing for Bob Hope. He did countless TV specials for NBC, but his most beloved productions were his annual Christmas specials. He continued to turn out movie after movie on the big screen as well, delighting audiences with his unique presence of slapstick physical comedy. Bob Hope was in his 50s now during the 1950s, and he was at the height of his career. He suffered one of the negative consequences of fame in the summer of 1953 at the end of the Korean War, though. A mentally ill war veteran verbally attacked Bob Hope and several other celebrities by saying they were using the, quote, power of their brainwaves to murder people. The veteran was ultimately admitted into a mental health facility, known of course as insane asylums in the 1950s, which, unfortunately for him and countless other veterans and mentally ill individuals, were not very therapeutic places to be. I couldn't find anything more about this man, but I hope he came out okay. The 1950s brought a bit more unwanted excitement in Bob Hope's life, this time in a scandalous article published in the tabloid gossip magazine Confidential in the summer of 1956. The article was authored by actress Barbara Payton. Payton was known to have numerous relationships with many high-profile actors, and Bob Hope was one of them. You see, Bob Hope was a beloved public personality, but he wasn't perfect. He had many extramarital affairs. In fact, I saw him described as a sex machine in more than one article. And one of these affairs was with Barbara Payton. She had a tragic life that I'm really looking forward to digging into down the road. But I'll just say for now that she struggled with some deep mental health and substance abuse issues. And this is part of what led her to publishing her tell-all story in Confidential magazine, including the nitty-gritty details of her sexual relationship with Bob Hope and the hush money he supported her with. To remedy this, Bob's PR team devised a plan to have Bob be Mr. Family Man for a while. So he set out hand in hand with his wife and 4 children following the event, something that the public ate right up in the 1950s. Career and reputation saved. This is the part I really don't care for, though. Well, aside from him being unfaithful to his wife. Instead of dropping the matter and moving on after the confidential scandal, Bob Hope proceeded to use his position to harm Barbara Payton's career and reputation. By all accounts, the relationship he had with her and many other women did indeed occur. So he wasn't innocent of everything she said. I tried to find an archive of the article and couldn't locate it, so I'm not clear on exactly what it said. So maybe she was malicious in her words and this set Bob Hope off. But what is certain is that his retaliation led to her contract with Universal being dropped and her career as she knew it ending. Her life traveled down a serious downward spiral from there, and I'll get into that when I cover her story. Yes, she made decisions that impacted the trajectory of her life, but Bob Hope also wasn't the perfect angel in the situation. But the men, it seems, always came out the winners in these scandals. Bob Hope, as you can imagine, was a really fun dad to have. I had a fun dad too. Lots of silliness, lots of humor. It's not a bad way to grow up. The difference between me and Bob Hope's children, though, is that my dad was a constant presence in my life every single day. We were a family unit with everything we did. Bob Hope's work had him away from home the majority of the time, so his children grew up with him gone a lot. But when he was home, he gave his kids his all. I want to quote a passage from his book that kind of sums up his feelings on this. He wrote, quote, "Dolores has a wise and loving touch with our children. I'm lost in admiration of the job she has done with them, and with the job she's doing keeping me in line. A lot of children whose fathers are in show business grow up to be precocious, too wise, too fresh, too unfunny. That's not true with our four. Dolores sees to that. She also sees to it that they're having a devout rearing. Among our neighbors is a family named Daly. One day, Mrs. Daly overheard our littlest one, Kelly, ask our next youngest, Nora, 'Is everyone in the world Catholic?' 'Yes,' Nora said. 'Everybody but Daddy. He's a comedian.'" End quote. Doesn't that just sound like something a child of Bob Hope would say? As the 50s came to a close, Bob's body and mind were sending him subtle signals that it was time to slow down. A few minor health issues, nothing too serious, caused him to cancel engagements and spend more time at home with Dolores and the kids, who were all in their preteen and late teenage years now. Bob didn't really know how to be home, so it was an adjustment for all of them. In the end, though, it was a blessing for them as a family. Bob offered up his time and energy to war efforts in every single war of his adult lifetime. So that meant the mid-1960s through the early 1970s brought him to Vietnam. I read an article published by the United States Army from Vietnam War veteran Lieutenant Colonel Charles Chamberlain about the time he spent with Bob Hope in Vietnam. Among all the shining things he had to say about Bob Hope, I want to share this from him. He said, quote, "I traveled with the Bob Hope Show in 1966. I traveled with him for about 3 weeks. That was a hoot. That was really a hoot. Hope told me, if anybody or general anybody wants to keep me from going where I want to go, I'll call the president. Nobody messed with him, but was taken care of. He was so especially regarded." End quote. Bob Hope wanted to be on the front lines if he had to be. He was there for the troops, the good and the ugly of it. Lieutenant Colonel Chamberlain went on to say how much he admired Bob Hope for visiting Vietnam at Christmas every single year during the United States' involvement in the war. He knew our troops needed him more than his loved ones back home. Bob Hope's strong support of the Vietnam War did cause a bit of a stir, though. The war had dragged on for years, and by the late 1960s, more and more Americans were fed up with the number of American lives lost and the country's continued involvement in the war. The anti-war movement was gaining steam fast, and this caused many people, depending on their views of the war, to maybe not love Bob Hope so much. Even some of the young troops were discouraged by Hope's loud opinions on ramping up the U.S. involvement in the conflict, because that meant more danger for them. In the end, Bob Hope just really loved supporting the United States military. He had strong views on it. But he realized he couldn't quite touch the hearts of every man the way he did during World War II. That didn't stop him from trying, though. He was still beloved by most, though. He would always be beloved. The 1970s saw even greater decline in Bob Hope's health and energy. His last feature film was in 1972, a movie called Cancel My Reservation. There was actually one more movie that was in the works in 1977, but it was never to happen. It was to be a long-awaited revival of the Road film series that would team up the Road trio one last time. Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and Dorothy Lamour. Road to the Fountain of Youth. It was going to be awesome. But sadly, Bing Crosby collapsed and died on a golf course in Madrid on October 14, 1977. Ending a beautiful project, a beautiful friendship, and a beautiful life. Bob was still popping up on stages and television screens during the 1980s. I'm lucky enough to be at an age, having grown up in the 80s, to remember seeing some of these larger-than-life old Hollywood personalities on TV specials and interviews from time to time throughout my childhood. Of course, back then, I had no idea how lucky I was to have been able to see these amazing people alive and well, still gracing the world with their energy. Bob Hope, Lucille Ball, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor. I wonder how many hundreds of times I saw that White Diamonds commercial. Anyways, I remember seeing all of these stars on TV. As far as Bob Hope, I recall watching his various MC gigs and loving that wit of his. And he guest starred on my favorite TV show of all time in 1989, The Golden Girls. If you haven't seen every single episode of The Golden Girls 83 times like I have, the episode is about Rose being determined that Bob Hope is her biological father, and he pulls through for her in a big Bob Hope kind of way. And to learn now that he was 86 years old and experiencing pretty significant decline in health when he made that appearance on the show, well, I still don't believe it. He came off as energetic and strong as ever. It never made sense to me that Rose would think Bob Hope was her father, because in my mind, they weren't that far apart in age. But I guess in reality, Bob Hope and Betty White did have 20 years separating them. He also guest starred on The Simpsons in 1992, which I did not know. Fun fact, Bart Simpson was my second celebrity crush. My first was Michael Jackson. I would watch Thriller over and over and over again when I was 5 years old. A very age-appropriate music video for a 5-year-old. I also remember Bob Hope's public presence during the Gulf War. With 90 right around the corner, Bob Hope hopped on a plane and went straight to the men fighting for the country once again. This time, his beautiful and faithful wife Dolores accompanied him on the tour, and she even hit the stage with him to sing White Christmas. I tried to find a video of this online but was unsuccessful. We all know that it was a tear-jerking moment, though. The world celebrated Bob Hope's birthday alongside him in May of 1993 with the television special, Bob Hope, The First 90 Years. I guarantee it was on in my house. Actually, this birthday special was so fantastic that it won an Emmy. Bob Hope was slowing down more and more with each passing year. And you know what? His mind and body had given more than their fair share to the world, so it's no wonder. It was difficult to get someone like Bob Hope to sit back and not make people laugh. But it comes to a point in everyone's life when we just don't have the choice anymore. He still had one more television spectacular in him, though. In November of 1996, Bob Hope hosted the television special Laughing with the Presidents, in which he highlighted his friendships, laughs, and antics with U.S. presidents over the decades. With this broadcast, Bob Hope closed the door on a remarkable 60-year contractual relationship with NBC. 60 years. One of Bob Hope's final public appearances was at his friend Jimmy Stewart's funeral in July of 1997. After the world saw that he finally appeared like an actual aging man, not the immortal, larger-than-life figure who never seemed to age, the Associated Press decided to write up an obituary for him, just in case. But then, whoopsies, they accidentally published it. There is no doubt in my mind that Bob Hope got quite a kick out of this little mishap, and he probably enjoyed reading the highlights of his life and legacy. I mean, I would love to read an obituary someone wrote about me. That strong, hilarious, inspiring spirit fought to stay in the world long enough to celebrate his 100th birthday. A whole century of Bob Hope. Just 2 months after he turned 100 years old, Bob Hope left this world after a fight against pneumonia. The end of a long, long era. And now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Aside from Bob Hope's extensive work traveling with the USO, he was very philanthropic in donating money to various organizations. He was a very generous man, both with his time and his money. In fact, the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation is still active today. Bob Hope was the emcee for or participated in some form or another 100 to 150 benefits every single year for years. And he donated a ton of his own personal wealth to those in need. Bullet point number 2. Piggybacking on that, Bob Hope had bought a large piece of property in Rancho Mirage, California to build a racetrack. He then decided that a hospital was needed in that area, so he donated that prime piece of real estate for the Eisenhower Medical Center to be constructed. He decided that was much more important than a racetrack. Bullet point number 3. Bob Hope was entered into the Guinness Book of World Records twice. Once for his long-standing 60-year contract with NBC, and the other for the number of awards he'd won. Over 1,500 awards. Bullet point number 4. Bob Hope was given permission to walk onto the set of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson at any time he wanted. He was the only entertainer ever given this honor. But I read a People magazine article that said, although this is true, Johnny Carson didn't particularly love Bob Hope. They alluded to the fact that there may have been some jealousy there. Jealousy over being the king of NBC. Before I say goodbye, I just want to end by sharing a few more Bob Hope quotes that I stumbled across, because I just love this man's wit. I'll start with this one. I've always been in the right place at the right time. Of course, I steered myself there. I love this one because it reminds us that we can all get where we want to go if we're willing to put in the work to get there. That's how I interpret it, at least. This one's good. The good news is that Jesus is coming back. The bad news is that he's really pissed off. How about this one? My next door neighbor just had a pacemaker installed. They're still working out the bugs, though. Every time he makes love, my garage door opens. And on charity, if you haven't got any charity in your heart, you have the worst kind of heart trouble. And finally, I have seen what a laugh can do. It can transform almost unbearable tears into something bearable, even hopeful. And Bob Hope gave that to so many people. In conclusion, Bob Hope was surely a one-of-a-kind man, wasn't he? He tried every job in the book before he landed in show business. And it was very clear there was no place Bob Hope belonged except for in show business. He loved to make people laugh, and he was really good at it. His comedic superpower was having the ability to be spontaneous and improvisational in the blink of an eye. That mind of his was truly genius in creating humor. What Bob Hope is really known for, however, was his patriotic commitment to his country during every single war and conflict that occurred in his adult life. He dropped everything and made sure the troops who had sacrificed everything they'd known to fight for their country were shown love, honor, gratitude, and best of all, humor. Bob Hope wasn't born in the United States. I'll be honest, I had no idea he was British. But he was more American than many born Americans. He loved his country. Bob Hope was a national treasure, and his memory will forever be treasured. Thank you, Bob Hope, for being so dang funny. I'm so happy to have memories of you in my own lifetime. Thank you for all you gave to the U.S. military during World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf War. You offered the hope needed by so many servicemen, and you gave them the escape from reality they so desperately needed. Bob Hope, thanks for the memories. And thank you all for listening. Please consider checking out the bonus content I have available on Patreon. Coming up next for my monthly bonus episode is Dean Martin's Celebrity Roasts. Man, I love a good roast. And I love Dean Martin. And we get a little bit more of Bob Hope along with that too. It's going to be a really, really fun episode. But it's only available on Patreon at the Oscar tier. Check it out at patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast. And if you want to hear your review on the show, don't forget to leave one. I'll read the good and the bad, but I would prefer a good review if you do plan to leave one. These ratings and reviews are actually really helpful in show discovery for new listeners too. So you would also be doing me a huge favor. After all, I'm making it now that I have a negative review on the books. So let's see how far you guys can help me make it. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great week. My primary source for this episode was one of Bob Hope's autobiographies, Bob Hope's own story, Have Tucks Will Travel, as told to Pete Martin by Bob Hope. I also used the book, Bob Hope, A Life from Beginning to End, part of the Hourly History series. The amazing documentary, American Masters, This is Bob Hope, from PBS. The United States Army website at army.mil. A People magazine article from August 22nd, 2022, that's my mom's birthday, and my little sidekick, IMDB.